So with that, let me turn this over to Gina for today's Path to Next event covering how to work with recruiters. And Gina will introduce the topic and her co-presenter, Carrie.
Thank you so much, Howard. Hey everyone, Gina Riley here. I am so excited. I almost have goosebumps, Carrie. I'm just like that we get to like hang out here for the next hour. It's like a throwback for me. So this, like Howard said, is the sixth in the Path to Next series. I had an anonymous person put a question in the Q&A asking how you can see the other videos. They're all on the IAN website under the events tab. And remember, you only have about a month more to see the Steve Dalton one. That one will be the one that we will pull as per agreed by an agreement we had with Steve. I want to go right into it because Carrie and I are going to absolutely fill up this time between her and I and all the questions that I know that many of you have. So let me introduce her. So Carrie Hutzel was with Intel for 8 years. So we were there at the same time. She has moved to the Standard Insurance Company 21 years ago. And while at the Standard, Carrie first started in recruiting. And a little fun fact is for anyone who knows Sherry Kitsowen, who also spent a good decade or so at Intel and now has her own executive search firm, Talents Group, and I'm also affiliated with her. She hired Carrie all those years ago. So exciting there. And after 2 years in recruiting, Carrie moved into an HR business partner role. So as we all know, when you're wearing all those hats, you really accumulate a lot of amazing experience, not just in one, function of HR, but multiple functions. 8 years after moving into HRBP, Carrie stepped in to lead talent acquisition with the Standard. She is passionate about equipping hiring managers to do a balance, objective assessment of talent, while thinking about recruiting as a two-way conversation between a candidate and an opportunity. And I love this as a segue to welcome Carrie because at the end of it all, interviews are conversations. They're not a drill session. They're not one way. The purpose is for hiring teams and companies to assess and evaluate a candidate's skills, behavioral and functional and technical, and for a candidate to decide if that opportunity is a fit for them. Carrie, welcome to IAN and our Path to Next series.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. So thanks for the invitation. Excited to share anything that I can that'll be helpful for the room. To Gina's point, my time with Intel, which was mid-90s to early aughts, was in recruiting and HR business partner as well. So I knew Gina first from college recruiting days in Jones Farm. And then transitioned over to the Standard in 2002, 2004. So I'm aging myself with my years here, but excited to be here, excited to share anything that I've learned through both my direct recruiting work and leadership in this function, if that will be helpful for this room.
I know it will be. Absolutely. And so what I want to do is remind the folks that are dialing in today is the Q&A is the place where you're going to put your questions. I will do my best to get to as many as I can. And we have a pretty active alumni, so I expect quite a few people to ask questions. Carrie and I have a lot planned for you. So I'm going to kick it off with a very essential question that Carrie's going to navigate. I'm going to put in the chat a couple of times 2 articles that also support what Carrie's going to say, that 2 articles I wrote for Forbes on the different recruitment models. So Carrie, what are the 3 main recruitment models? What are the differences between them? What do we need to know about different kind of recruiters?
Different kind of recruiters. So I'd say there are 3 main types of recruiters. There's a little bit of subsets in there, but if we think about at the highest level, when you're seeking opportunities, you're either going to work with someone who is an employee of the company or is directly in service to the company. And you'll hear those folks referred to as corporate recruiters. So they are an employee of, in my case, Standard Insurance Company. They may be a contract recruiter, or they might be working with a BPO firm. In recruiting, we call it an RPO firm. But their sole focus is filling positions with that company that either employs them or that they're contracted with. And so that corporate recruiting is really that interface directly with hiring leaders. The other couple of categories are firms and recruiters who work with a variety of companies, and maybe in some cases a variety of industries, but typically it's a variety of companies within an industry. First search model there would be contingent search. And so firms like, you might hear from a firm like Robert Half or Allegis Global or others, where those firms are working with multiple companies. They have teams of recruiters who are building relationships with candidates, and they're presenting those candidates to either companies or people that they have relationships with that in their client firms. And then that approach can give a candidate exposure to a bunch of different companies. The exposure there is going to be based on the relationship that those recruiters have with the firms with which they work. And then those individuals are paid by the company at typically as a percentage of the compensation of the individual that they place. And so with my team, particularly our IT team, we have a couple of firms that we work with on this basis. My team will be focused on a search, and then we might engage a couple of contingent firms because it's a hard to find skill set. And we've got companies that we know who we are, know the technologies we're working to hire, and they can look through their bigger databases and find talent for us and bring that forward. And so that's a contingent search. I would say that's the most common search model out there. And then the third would be, I use the term retained search. You might hear the term executive search, and you're talking about engagements with a firm that a company establishes in order to fill, usually it's a vice president level or more senior, maybe a C-suite level role. And that is an exclusive arrangement. And an example of that, we had a role that we filled a few years ago that was leading one of our lines of business. And we arranged a contract with a single firm whose focus was to fill that search, and they worked it until it was filled. The fee arrangement is different. So because it's an exclusive arrangement and we're choosing a firm with whom we have deep trust, who we know they have the expertise, we know they know the market that we're working with, and we're paying them up front for the search, and then they're keeping that search until it's filled. And again, that group of firms, sometimes there's some overlap between the contingent firms and the retained firms. You'll hear firms like Spencer Stewart or Egon Zehnder or some of those firms. And then there are also boutique executive search firms like Talents Group and others that work through that arrangement to do deep search in more senior roles.
The one thing that I have noticed over my entire career is the confusion around contingent search. As a candidate, especially if you're someone that could work in a variety of different companies with your skill set, you may get a reach out from recruiters at different firms. What does this mean for a candidate? I've gotten a call for something that sounds similar from two different companies,
Mm.
and those companies are contingent search. But as the job seeker, you don't know better than to ask, is this contingent? Why am I getting two different calls? And then how do you play that out? What
That's a
happens
great
if you're in that
question.
scenario? Can you help with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's not uncommon to work with a couple of firms. If an individual is in the job market, and their search target is at that contingent layer. So maybe that's a supplement in addition to other networking that you're doing, other relationship building that you're having. If you're working with a couple of contingent firms and it sounds like two firms are bringing you the same opportunity, my advice would be commit to one firm to represent you for that opportunity. If you have two companies that are both bringing you as a candidate, that the risk is you end up dropping out as a candidate because the company can't figure out who they would have the relationship with to bring you forward. And the other thing that's important to keep things clear and transparent with a firm that you're working with, if you're also applying directly or interviewing on things that you've pursued, you learned from a friend about a great opportunity and then you applied and you're talking with the recruiter and the hiring leader, and a contingent firm brings that to you, you need to let that contingent firm know that you're already working on that position with the company. Or if the contingent firm brings you in, then continue to work that path through the contingent firm, putting yourself into both direct apply and a contingent search or multiple contingent searches. It will create confusion, and it could create some conflict, not emotional conflict, but just contractual conflict for the company that you're hoping to work for and how they navigate that. So as clean as you can keep that for the firm that you're working with and the company with whom you're interviewing, the more smooth that path will be for you and then for all the partners that you're working with through that.
Thank you so much. I want to pull out a really important nuance of what you said. You said, following that contract. What I want our fellow alums to hear right now is how recruiters get paid. Is there any instance that you have ever heard of, Carrie? Because I have not. I'm just going to front load this, where a candidate, a job seeker, is paying someone to, air quotes, find them a job. Who do the contingent recruiters work for, and when and how do they get paid?
Contingent and retained. So both of the search models that we talked about are paid, well, and really all three, your corporate recruiters are also paid by the hiring company. When the standard works with a contingent firm or a retained firm to fill a role, we've entered into a contractual agreement with that firm to pay them a percentage of some fee. It's usually a percentage of compensation for a candidate that we hire, that they bring into our process. And so we, as the company, hiring entity, we're paying that fee to a search firm. And then, of course, my team is paid salary by Standard Insurance, so we're paid by the company as well. But if you're thinking about if you're working with an Insight Global or another firm, Tech Systems, others, there's a lot out there that would be focused in your areas. They're paid by the firm that hires you. You aren't making a payment. I haven't heard of candidate funded search where a candidate would give dollars to a firm to help them find a role. And it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but I would question the effectiveness, because the firm that's working with hiring companies is building the relationships to the places that have the opportunities. And that's what brings opportunities to you as a candidate. If I'm paying you dollars and then you're needing to go find the opportunities, the faucet, you're kind of swimming upstream a little bit versus working with a firm where the opportunities are being brought to them through their own sales organization to help bring companies into their net. So
Thank you. I love the way that you drew that out. And one of the ways it's an analogy or metaphor that my husband helped me come up with, and I wrote it in one of my Forbes articles. It's the difference between a talent scout and a talent agent. So if a scout goes out to find talent and bring it back for a team, for example, but an agent would be someone that represents an individual trying to farm them out and find them a home. And so if you use baseball as a limited example, there's limited teams to help try to farm a specific player towards. But if you have a toolkit that could be applied anywhere in the world, so to speak, who's going to be that one agent that you would pay who would guarantee to find you a job? And so, as Carrie said, much more nicely than I would, I'm saying very strongly, I haven't seen that model pan out. I have heard of people paying $6,000 and then not ending up with a job and there was no guarantee. So just be cautious of that. So thank you for that, Carrie. We are getting a couple of questions, so let me go ahead and see what we have here. I have heard not putting an end date on your last experience because recruiters are less likely to reach out to candidates. What are your thoughts? Putting an end date on, so that must be in LinkedIn, maybe particularly, possibly on the resume, but leaving it open. I'm not exactly sure where to take that one either, Carrie.
yeah, I think the assumption I'm making is someone has left their opportunity
Yeah.
and they're not wanting to have it look on the resume like they aren't currently employed.
Yeah.
And that's a choice. That's a choice you can make. I understand where the thought process might be that a candidate who's currently employed is seen as a stronger candidate than one who isn't.
Mhm.
The challenge is you could be perceived once you start the screening process as not being completely transparent, and depending on how important that is to the company with whom you're interviewing, that could create a little bit of a bump for you. If I have a candidate that I've spoken with who doesn't have an end date, and so I've had that happen, then I've had them submit me a new resume so that when I'm sharing them with the hiring team, then it's clear that everyone understands, and that's the most important thing, is people feel like they've got a quality process and things are clear and they understand what is
That's very
happening.
kind of you. That's attentive to do that for a candidate, because candidates are, in a state of confusion, and they're just trying to do the best thing to get seen in the first place. And from my experience, and what we'll see in June when we have Hannah Morgan and Kevin D. Turner on talking about LinkedIn, is if you've left a company and you have an end date and you feel like that's the thing to be in integrity, to make sure you end up, you may want to wait 1 or 2 months, but you don't want it to be a year out and it's open, because
Mhm,
that now
mhm.
we're in the untruthful section. You do need to have a job on LinkedIn to appear as if you do have a job. So whether or not that's kind of a dummy opportunity where you have maybe your own consulting, name or shingle, but you need to have something in there to be seen as having a job. And you can say seeking opportunities in that section on LinkedIn, and those two people will tell you much more in depth how to do that. But there is a little bit of favoritism toward people that have a job. Would you say, Carrie? I mean,
Yeah,
I think those
that's
of us that
fair.
we're open-minded, but
Yep.
still.
No, I understand why the question is there. I think that there's some reality to that. I also think there's an opportunity, and I think your 1 to 2 month window
Mhm.
is a really good window to have in mind. And I do think that there's an opportunity to vary either within the resume or early in conversation to be able to just to be able to give some facts that help a recruiter or a leader understand and get some clarity around the transition that you're working through.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We have quite a few coming in. Is it common for employers to work with multiple contingent firms on the same opportunity? And why would an employer engage multiple firms on the same job? I love that question.
So no, that's a great question.
Okay.
The answer is yes. It's common with contingent firms.
Mhm.
And the reason that we do it is each firm has their own database of candidates. And so we may get a candidate from one firm that we wouldn't necessarily see from another firm. I would say that if a company is using 5 or 6 or 7 candidate or firms on a search, then it starts to be ineffective and inefficient because you get so much layover and you're kind of playing a game of who presented the candidate first. But companies that use contingent firms strategically will build relationships with in a functional area. And I'll go back to my IT example. We use contingent search with IT and with our actuarial teams. We build deep relationships with 2 or 3 firms. And when we engage, we have a rep from each of those firms on our kickoff call. They're all hearing the same profile on the role. They're all
Mhm.
hearing the priorities that we need for the role. We have weekly check-in calls, which with all 3 firms represented, 2 or 3 firms represented. And
Wow.
we're working through the candidate pipeline so that there's transparency and clarity on who we're presenting, what's working and what's not working. So it just brings you a bigger pool
Yeah.
particularly if we're working on something that is either really hard to find, or conversely, it can be there are so many we need help kind of bringing the cream to the top. Those are 2 strategies that we might use when we bring a contingent firm in. But with contingent, I like to have at least 2 firms. If I'm being honest, I don't want to be single threaded on a single firm. And then if something happens with that relationship, their candidate quality begins to dip, the relationship management starts to fracture a little bit, then we're left without a firm to partner with. And so
Okay, I have a nuance.
yeah,
How
it's
common is it?
helpful.
I'm so impressed that you have those people in the room to do those reviews. What have you had it happen where two firms on a meeting will say, we both found this same person. We both have John Smith or Jane Smith. Does
Yep.
it
And then it's
happen?
whoever brought it to us first.
But what
I
if
mean,
it's the same meeting? I mean, who gets the
great question. So the way that and I don't know that all companies have this capability set up the way we have it set up within our applicant tracking system to work with us. And more companies are going this way, just as our supplier management functions get more robust in companies. There's more consistency and rigor around managing your contractual relationships, and that contingent firm is a contractual relationship. So we have our contingent firms submit resumes through the applicant tracking system. The weekly
okay.
meeting is a check-in and feedback and adjust, but the actual submissions are happening through our ATS. And so they're time stamped on when we get candidates from different firms. Yeah.
So
Not all
happy to
companies
hear
may
that.
have the luxury of the HRIS resources to put that infrastructure in their ATS, depending on their size and their focus. But that's really helped us to kind of keep things clear for the candidate and for the search firm.
That's incredible. Okay, I've got at least 4 stacked up here. Here's one. I did not have a good experience working with recruiters from large companies like Google, Tesla, and Meta. With sloppy last minute interviews set up or being pressed for time, not having time when you're going through the interview process. Recruiters kept setting up interviews without inviting the candidate, calling me 10 minutes before, etc. This person is asking a question. I don't want to spend too much time on it because it's not a for every. How do I provide any input to them to improve their processes? I'm having a reaction to the question. What's
I am as well. I am
uh,
as well. Because that feels like an org where neither
it,
the candidates, the hiring leaders, or TA are set up for success based on for whatever reason. But
I'm not sure as an outside candidate if offering improvements to a giant like Google, their hiring process is going to buy you anything special. You may help some other candidate down the line, but a lot of times you're working with first and second line recruiters. They're not going to go and change the entire recruiting
yeah.
process for all of Google.
No, I would agree. I think it's learnings that you take though, because when you are in a position to be a hiring leader or on a hiring team, to be curious about how is the candidate going to experience this? How are we ensuring that the scheduling is happening? Scheduling is the secret sauce to interviewing. I firmly believe that, but it does put you in a position to know how ineffective it is when that is disconnected, and to be able to be in a position to bring a point of view and make sure that's better when you're in a role where have got some hiring responsibilities.
I think that's a really there's also a good point too for the candidate is as you engage with the recruiters, asking for that clarity about exactly how it's going to go down, and making sure you know who you're going to be meeting with so you can check them out on LinkedIn, et cetera. So that might be one way to take back a little tiny sliver of power for yourself, because I know job seekers feel powerless, and that might be one way to do it. I've got a lot of good questions. Sadly, I've had a few instances of people pretending to be recruiters as part of a scam. Could you go over what some of the red flags to check for might be?
Things that come to mind for me is if they're asking for more information from you, or they're asking for information that feels like it would be irrelevant to a role, would be the place that I would start. Is what level of personal information are they asking for, or how are they looking to propose it? I would ask what company they work for. I'd go do some checking on what the company is if there's anything that you've got questions about. And those are a couple things that come to mind for me. I don't know if you've got other thoughts, Gina.
My main thing here is I'm going to put in the chat when I have a second. I strongly recommend people follow a career coaching peer of mine. His name is Mark Anthony Dyson, Mark with a K. He is a Substack. I'll go find his LinkedIn profile and put it in here for folks. Mark is my guru for paying attention to these job search scams, and he's got a
Mhm.
little team of two
Great.
other people that have their own businesses, and they do LinkedIn lives about this. So I can't claim to be a guru, but I follow gurus so that I'm better informed. So that I would go deep. So for those who are worried about scams, let's go. That I'm going to point you to Mark.
That's
Okay, my friend Ellen, there are better or worse recruiters. How do we find a good recruiter, and in particular, someone who has experience with our skill set or industry? Again, one question, Ellen, though, is the recruiter working for the job seeker? Not so much. So I think part of the way to look at this, Carrie, might be doing research on the company that is calling you in the first place. Does this look like a legit recruitment company? Does this recruiter have, a background of recruiting? Can you see them visibly on Intel on LinkedIn? Two blue companies. What would you say to that? How do you find people who might be well versed in your toolkit, your skill set to help you?
the first thing I would do is call people I know who have been in search. I'd leverage my network. I would, you could put something out into LinkedIn and see who responds that's in your network if you wanted to post it that way. But I hear you. There are firms who scattershot resumes to companies with no depth of relationship, and sometimes something sticks and sometimes it doesn't. And I don't have confidence in their candidate relationship management skills.
Mhm.
And so I absolutely would talk to people that in your network, in your industry, and ask for recommendations and set up conversations with folks that they recommend. You could at least get the name of a firm, because if you get to a firm, you may or may not get to the specific recruiter that an individual that worked with. But if their experience with the firm was positive, then you can trust that their training, their CRM, their candidate relationship management tool, and their infrastructure should be able to replicate a similar experience to what someone in your network had. That's the first place I would go. I
I,
would,
I
I
think
would
that you
call my
couldn't put
friends.
that any better. I mean, I'm connected to a woman named Wendy Schoen, and her expertise is executive search for the legal industry. So it's lawyers and leadership in law firms, et cetera. So that's just one example. So there are specialty firms, but you need to ask around. There's no database that just is going to give you a magical, list. And also you can leverage AI to generate lists, go to Claude, Perplexity, et cetera, and just feed it, what are the top firms who work with candidates on this skill set, and you may come up with some new ideas. I love AI for idea generation. So Ellen's got another one. As a job seeker, is it a good strategy for me to work with multiple recruiters? It seems so, as they are likely working with different companies, but what are the pros and cons of this?
Do you want me to go ahead and jump in?
Yes, ma'am. I have my own
Absolutely. Okay.
opinion.
So, Ellen, I think the question that I would put back to you is, how many relationships can you have like that and be able to leverage and invest the time and energy that you need to make sure that the relationship is getting you what you need? If I were out there in the market, in addition to any networking that I'm doing myself to learn about more companies, not just about opportunities, but companies that might make sense for me, or organizations, I would leverage a couple of folks that are in contingent search, probably not more than two or three, in part because you will start to get overlap and confusion, and in part because it's just a lot of relationships to maintain in my brain. Like, I can be focused with two or three folks who can then bring me results. And if I work with a firm and they're not really bringing me anything, I'd stop working with them and I'd find a different firm to work with. But some economies of scale on how much focus you can have distributed across a number of different partners. So.
Oh, this one's juicy. Use of AI in job search, especially material development. Are you seeing more companies use AI
Mhm.
detection software? And what policies are they adopting? For example, how much use of AI is tolerated? I'm sure 100% is too much, but 50% okay. Many of us start to work with an AI draft, but then customize it. How much should be our work?
I think that's a question that I'd ask if you're being asked to do bring a body of work with you to an interview. I would start that with to get that understanding from whoever you're engaging with to set that interview up. I am seeing companies begin to put in requirements that, you know, candidates can't use AI during the interview process. We've encountered that. We'll ask a candidate a question, they'll type the question into AI, and then they'll read the response back. And it's not a super subtle thing. So we're usually leaders are able to pick up on it pretty quickly. And you're starting to put that piece in place. But if it's about developing if it's about developing a code, or if it's about developing something and bringing that in, I would ask the person that you're working with. Like, I typically use AI as my inspiration, and then I build it out from there. Is that an okay type of product to bring in, or are you wanting me to bring this in from scratch? I would work to just get that clear.
I'll give a little extra flavor here too, is if you imagine that your initial resume, cover letter, the things that you're sending in through the ATS, and you know that recruiters are at least skimming them, imagine if you do no adjusting, how many other hundreds potentially of people have the exact same language that came from AI. These recruiters see it all day long. My husband is now an instructor at a college, and we were sitting doing work together one day. He goes, "Oh gosh, now I see what you recruiters go through. These students have cut and paste. Like, I have half my class, not half, but a lot of people with the exact same language, and there was no way that they each wrote the exact same thing." So think of it from the other perspective. If you were in those shoes, make your adjustments and make it your own. Make it your own. Steal with pride and then make it your own. All right. I'm curious how recruiters handle candidates are hiding their true age because the candidates are older. Do recruiters pay attention to that detail? Is it better to be honest about experience and dates? I think this is more about putting your dates on these marketing materials, meaning LinkedIn and resume. What do you think?
I think that the relevant experience is always important to have out there. And if that relevant experience, takes you 25 years, 30 years, then that's the relevant experience that you'd want to represent. I have seen folks who may choose to bring in maybe their last 15 years of experience because that's what feels like it's the most relevant to the current market. And then they might reference prior experience with a couple of things in the resume. Again, I'd say it's a personal choice. An organization really cannot or should not be saying, because you are at this stage of career, we're not going to consider you. The choice to really ensure that they get exposure to the things that are most important is a choice that you can make. I wouldn't do it in a way that gives you gaps. And I would say that to bring ease to a contingent recruiter or a corporate recruiter or a hiring leader, being able for people to track the timing of your experience is going to be important, either explicitly by listing your employers chronologically, or if you choose to have a resume that highlights skills and behaviors and project work, ensure you've got a chronological list of your employers. If you choose to drop that after 15 years or so, then that's a choice you can make. But ensure that you've got people's ability to be able to track that through on your resume. When I have resumes that have experience floated through and then there's no indication, or it's hard for me to see when they worked where, that can be a resume that gets set to the side.
Okay. I think it's tougher on LinkedIn because the dates are the dates. It's a little easier to represent these things with nuances on a resume, like previous experience, and then just listing them as a list without dates, can feel better. But in the end, we end up showing up and we are who we are on those Zoom calls, and age discrimination is real. We know it. Many of us on this Zoom call, Carrie and I included, are considered old because we're over 40. I know.
Low bar.
So I know. We empathize with all of you. This one I'm struggling with this question. Does your 1 to 2 month window, remember on LinkedIn?
Yep.
You mentioned start after there's a word that doesn't fit, leave, or after your actual working day. And I'm not sure if this, like for Intel employees, like they'll get a separation. I'm trying to read into this question. So if you got a severance and that pushes you out a couple months, I think we're kind of splitting hairs. At the end of it all, you need to get an end date on there so that you feel like you're in integrity and you're representing yourself well. I think that your energy might be better spent considering what you're going to put after that so that you can explain to people that go to your profile, oh, I see, they were part of a large layoff at Intel and they're pursuing this. That's what you need to be communicating. And when you put that on there, then LinkedIn is triggered to think you have a job, which helps you better populate into recruiter searches if they are being biased toward those who have a job. That's what you want. You want to get seen and you want to populate. Wouldn't you say, Carrie?
Yep, agreed. 1000%.
Okay, so we'll keep it moving because I feel like I think we're good. Is it common for a potential employer to hire candidates for contract positions directly rather than through executive search firm? Executive search firms aren't really doing contract work per se. They're trying to find that VP or that CFO. So that's a little different. If so, what are the implications for the candidate with additional taxes or fees? So candidates aren't paying recruiters, folks. Candidates don't pay the recruiter. So even if you're getting hired for a contract role or it's a contingent search and you're getting placed into a role, you're going to pay the taxes based on what you earn. So is there a nuance I'm missing, Carrie, you think?
Well, so we talked earlier about contingent search. We've talked about it a little bit. The firms and this might kind of dovetail into Marcy's question as well. The contingent firms, PS, they really make their money by placing people in contract positions.
Okay.
So and they often do contingent search kind of on the side because they have this huge resume database of candidates that are available for contract work. And they may also be interested in search. But those firms usually are doing both contract placements in companies and FTE placement with companies.
Perfect. Okay.
So if you're talking with a search person and you're interested in both, let them know that, because it may very well be that they're going to place you on a contract position that could turn into full-time, or that could help add some experience onto your resume. It can build in a number of ways. You will get paid hourly. It's uncommon. It might be a salary arrangement, but it's typically an hourly arrangement, and it rarely comes with things like paid time off or benefits. And so you'd be taxed on a contract role just like you would any other employee based on your withholdings and such. But the other pieces that are part of a fuller employer benefits package might be missing on that contract piece. But it can be a path if you're doing 12-month contract, 18-month contract, 24 months. Sometimes firms will place people on statement of work projects where a company says, I've got this thing that I need to get done and I need someone to do it. And the firm will take on that contract and then assign resources to go work on it. So it can give you a couple of different avenues. If you're talking with firms that are looking for you for contingent work, they may also do contract work, and that can be another great path for you.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And thank you to the person asking that question. Marcy, is there favoritism for people who already have a job? Is it even possible to get a job offer if you've been laid off for a year? Yes, absolutely. You can get a job if you've been laid off for a year. I've seen people especially at the executive levels, it can take, someone at the C-suite level 18 months or more to land an ideal job, because if you think of jobs in a hierarchical triangle, there's only so many jobs at the top. But as Carrie and I discussed, yes, there can be a bias. There can be a bias, recruiter to recruiter, company to company, for wanting that prized person that is seated in a role. But the reality that my reality in talking with people like Carrie and other recruiters is we're in the recruitment role, we're all human. We want to help people get into jobs. And we understand, especially since the pandemic, how long it can take people to get jobs. So I think the bias is probably lessening. It does maybe cause a problem just getting sourced in LinkedIn. Carrie, what's your take?
No, I agree. I completely agree, particularly in this time.
Mhm,
And as a much awareness as there is within recruiting circles around companies that are making shifts,
mhm,
particularly an employer like Intel or other big ones, we know what's happening and we know what can drive a gap, particularly coming out of some of those companies.
mhm,
I think it's beholden on someone who has been out of the workforce for a year to make sure that communication skills are staying sharp, ability to navigate through interview questions stays sharp. You're really crisp on your relevant experience and can engage in that way. I just screened a gal who had been out of the workforce for a year, and she had great answers. The ability for her to articulate in this crispness that
mhm.
we needed for that role was different from other candidates, and I had a wondering on my mind on if some of that came from the time out of the workforce. And so just staying crisp, staying clear, keeping yourself practiced will help keep you at the head of the pack when those conversations happen, even with a gap in employment.
Thank you. So I have many, many, many from it might be one person, an anonymous attendee, but I have a bunch of people like with their names on here. I'm going to cherry pick through there in case that's all one person. Um, so recruiters call me regularly. I don't answer numbers I don't know. They leave a message. They never leave a message. Why is that? They will message me on LinkedIn and send an email, but never leave a message. I don't get it. What would you say to Stacy there?
I would say engage with them on LinkedIn. I don't know why they're not leaving a message. If your preference is to talk, if your preference is to have a conversation versus messaging through LinkedIn, then I'd let them know that when you're communicating with them through LinkedIn. I don't know. I think that folks are dialing. Some we use the phrase dialing for dollars, and you're hoping somebody will pick up. And if they don't pick up, then you assume they're not going to call you back. But it's not uncommon, and I think it's even more common now in this day when everyone has a mobile phone versus in the 90s and early aughts when you'd be calling people at their desk phones at work. You just can reach out to so many more people now, and so I do think that that results in less investment in each call than we used to have. So
Mhm. I really I feel for people in this position because we all get so much spam calls, and of course we don't want to have to pick it up, and it's a real catch 22. So I just want to say my heart goes out to you.
yeah.
I it's this isn't Carrie and I don't have the magical formula for all of these really tricky situations, but we are here to be empathetic and offer the best advice possible. So, Lori asked, do you have suggested wording for the gap in your resume between your end date after your last company has been acquired?
Mm.
Oh, that is you've dealt with, mergers, acquisitions. Do you have any suggestions?
The I'm trying to think of why you might not just put that on the resume.
Right.
So,
And
end
are
date
and
and
Lori,
then
if she's
company
staying.
acquired, by, and just to be clear on that on the resume itself.
Yeah.
That doesn't feel like a conflict. I might not put that on LinkedIn. I might think about phrasing it a little bit differently on LinkedIn so that your gap is covered
Yeah.
to Gina's advice earlier, but I would appreciate that clarity on a resume.
Yeah, and I would say on LinkedIn, it's actually, I might be wrong, Lori. So if I'm answering it not exactly the way that you were thinking, but let's say I work for ABC Corp and it gets, bought by XYZ Corp, you're going to have ABC on there. Maybe you work there for 5 years and then you put your next role as XYZ. And then in the first line, took on this role after acquisition of ABC
Mhm.
Corp. Now I get it. You told the story and you only need one sentence. So, but I'm not sure if maybe you stopped working for ABC, then there's a gap and you went for XYZ. I can't quite tell, but we're just trying to answer it the best we can. Okay. So, let's see. Carrie, I'm curious if you have advice for the people on the call today where some of the missteps that people make in working with recruiters, like you're sitting at the round table or at lunch with your team and they're like, "God, oh, I had this candidate do this today or that." What are some of those things that get you talked about?
Um, well, I'm happy to say that in the industry that we're in, we're all about integrity and trust and relationships. And so we tend not to get into those conversations a ton, and I hear you. But the things that will cause a candidate to kind of fall lower down on the list. I think that's what you're asking, Gina. Is that fair?
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, there are things like answering the "tell me about yourself" question for 20 minutes out of 60. That's just like sort of like, and it doesn't have to be personal. Again, if we're at lunch and I'm
mhm.
talking about someone, I'm not saying exactly Jill Smith did this thing. It's like, gosh, I had someone that did this, and we all go, oh gosh, I wish that they would get their story together. Or what are just the things like even on Zoom, like I had someone whose face was only halfway in the frame and they didn't realize it. Like things like that where you're like, "Oh, goodness."
Yeah, there's some basic Zoom or Teams call hygiene, making sure your background is clear, or making sure you're presented professionally. You've got the right, you've dressed for the conversation as if you're walking into a conference room and
Mm,
on site. I think your point about being crisp on answers, so conversations with candidates that take up more time than is needed to get your story told means you're going to have less time to share experience across a few different things. So I'd be mindful. You don't have to be abrupt, but I would be succinct in your answers with candidates or with recruiters, sorry. And the other thing that really sets candidates apart is candidates who they're curious. They're curious about the opportunity. They're curious about the company. They want to know what's important to the company. They want to know what that role really needs. And not just of course, we're kind of in the background going, all right, does my experience line up for that? And if so, how do I highlight it? That's absolutely part of the formula that you're calculating. And the ability to approach that conversation, it's two-way. The company is learning about you, you are learning about the company, and both parties want the other to be curious about them. So
mm,
just showing up in a way that really is genuine and wanting to understand like I said, what the culture of the organization is, what that role is really positioned to do, if there's a specific role that you're talking about,
mhm,
what things are strengths, why do people stay, what excites people about working there. Have questions that'll really help you assess and understand that company and show some interest beyond any one role.
mhm. Thank you for
That
that.
is just a differentiator. In my book, that's been a differentiator for candidates.
Right. A lot of it comes down to communication and presentation,
Mhm.
just to stand out in the best possible light. And I took the question in a more of a funny way, like, okay, what do we see that we're like, oh, I wish they wouldn't do that. Um, so we're getting close to the end. We have like, probably 4 to 5 minutes to actually talk back and forth together, and then we'll do a closeout. I know you have a meeting, and we Intel people like to run on time. One of the people asked a question about I chose to retire from Intel and I
Mhm.
took care of my dad and my family. How do I present it on LinkedIn? And I'm going to just give a quick one too.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
so the quick answer is you can put as a job, let's say on LinkedIn, there are different ways that you can position that, but you can say personal leave or something to that effect, and then just say, after taking a voluntary separation from Intel, took care of some things with my family, no details. Nobody needs to know why.
Mhm. Okay.
And now seeking an opportunity to do what? So look at the forward thinking thing to keep yourself positive and promoting yourself in a positive light. I have had people take plenty of time off for things like children in rehab or, whatever. There are things that happen. Our parents pass away, what have you, things happen. So, I am having two LinkedIn experts on though in 2 months. Please come to that one because you will learn a ton about like these nuances. So, Carrie, anything you would
No,
change with that?
I think that's absolutely great. Life happens and people have responsibilities, and I agree. enough so people can have some context, but you don't need to go into all the details.
Okay.
And leaning forward, what's the next thing that you're looking forward to?
Absolutely. And then I'm going to go with this last one, and then we've got closeout stuff. So you talked about honing crisp answers to recruiter questions. How much subject matter expertise should we be
Oh,
assuming
good
the
question.
recruiter has? Yeah. Or does the crisp answer need to include some subject matter or situational context? Context, one of my favorite words, to help the recruiter understand the response. What would you say to that? That's a new one.
That's a great question. And some companies have technical recruiters, some companies have the recruiter is really assessing behaviors and experience and profiles. So you'll get I think you'll pick up on the depth of the technical screening that the recruiter is doing based on the questions that they ask. It is, I think it's absolutely fair to ask, will it be helpful if and then fill in the blank on what the technical piece is that you want to walk through, or would you rather have me walk through experience without sounding condescending to the recruiter, but because they might be super technical or they may not. But I would just get grounded with them on what level of depth they want you to go into, and let them and take your lead from there.
Thank you so much. Okay, so I think we're at a good place to invite Howard back on for our final closeout. First, Carrie, thank you. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your wisdom. And I just felt calmer and more peaceful just listening to you, explain things, because I know this is such a time of turmoil for so many people. So thanks for just bringing your wisdom and your demeanor and your caring. It's just really heartwarming. And I hope, throw it in the chat. Thank Carrie. I mean, follow her on LinkedIn. She's an amazing human being. So thank you so much.
I hope it was helpful. Job search is a vulnerable time, and it takes a lot of courage to navigate that time. And I want to share appreciation for an opportunity to be helpful in any way that might have been helpful here.
You're awesome. We appreciate you. The other fun thing is today officially I am announcing my book that's coming out September 9th, 9/9/25. The book is called Qualified Isn't Enough. Develop Your Story, Land the Interview, and Win the Job. And I put my book launch list to just keep people informed about the book, because I've got it's 6 months from today. So if you want to go to my homepage for Gina Riley Consulting, and right there in the top section, there's a place to put your name, and then you'll just be informed. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that, of course, as we get to September. But it's to help job seekers develop their story so that they can stand out as with their unique value proposition. So there's that. I'm going to punt to you, Howard.
Thank you, Gina. And Carrie as well. I want to thank both of you. Gina, you invested some tremendous time working with the Alumni Network here on doing this Path to Next series. It has received outstanding reviews, and I'm sure based upon the engagement we had today and the retention of the people who stayed for the entire session, that this is no exception. So once again, thank you very much, Carrie. It was great meeting you and getting an opportunity to share some of your experience as well. I'd just like to highlight again some upcoming events. As we've referenced, Gina has the next two Path to Next events for May 14th, subject to be announced, and on June 11th for LinkedIn Best Practices. We also have our next Gen AI event that will be finalized soon. And we have the Viking mission program that we're putting together probably for a little later in Q2 or maybe Q3. So keeping those in mind, we are clearly open to your suggestions in terms of the types of events you would like to see. Please send event ideas either to me at howard@intelalumni.org or at james@intelalumni.org. And once again, we would sincerely appreciate any additional support, be it your time, your talent, and/or financial support, to help us keep delivering the kind of quality programs that you've enjoyed today. So thank you again for your participation. Have a great rest of the day, and we look forward to seeing you at future events.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks,
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Carrie.